Look, boss. It was 3:45 a.m. on a miserable Tuesday in October 2019. Seattle weather was behaving like a total fucking bitch, that constant, annoying drizzle mixed with the stench of downtown trash that makes your nostrils want to file for a restraining order. I was sitting in my studio apartment, which was basically a glorified walk-in closet with a view of a literal brick wall, wearing a black hoodie stained with 3-day-old coffee and pure, unadulterated regret. I was dragging on a cheap, stale cigarette I'd practically scammed off a crackhead down the street. Life was a goddamn masterpiece, right, boss? My bank account was sitting at a fat, juicy zero. Zero. Zilch. Nada. My landlord, Mr. Johnson, a guy whose face looked like a topographic map of a massive stroke, had been blowing up my phone with texts saying either I cough up the rent or he'd kick my broke ass to the curb by Monday morning. Now look, boss, I'm disaster. I don't take orders from anyone, and I definitely don't let some bottom-feeding landlord talk down to me. I sent him a reply that probably burned his retinas and flipped my laptop shut. But let's be real, boss, hunger is a cold-hearted hoe, and it was screaming for attention like a stripper on rent day. I flipped open my MacBook, which had a screen crack so deep it looked like a map of the fucking Grand Canyon, and started scrolling through the dark web. I was looking for a hustle, anything to keep the lights from going dark. Between ads for slightly used human kidneys and black market AK-47s, this neon green pop-up started flashing like a seizure-inducing strip club sign. It was annoying as hell, pulsing with this toxic, radioactive glow that made my retinas burn, boss. The ad read, Night Security Wanted. The Forgotten National Archive. Salary, $10,000 per week. I laughed so hard I almost hacked up a lung. 10 grand? For a security gig? That's either a government experiment or a one-way ticket to a snuff film, boss. I knew it was a total shaft, a trap set for desperate losers. But I'm disaster, I've got my own rules and I don't fear the devil. If I ever meet the prick, I'll just ask him for a light. I clicked apply while muttering, well, let's see what kind of bullshit this is. Maybe I'll find out why my life is such a train wreck. 10 minutes later, a ping hit my phone. A location. It wasn't in downtown Seattle, boss. It was out in the sticks, a desolate, industrial wasteland tucked behind a fog-heavy forest near the outskirts of the city. As a half-Egyptian, half-American kid who spent enough time in the rougher parts of Cairo to know a scam when I see one, I knew that these middle-of-nowhere spots at 4 a.m. were where people went to get buried. But I don't back down, boss. Not from a dare, and definitely not from a paycheck. I ran out of the apartment, dodging a speeding Tesla that almost turned me into a sidewalk stain. I screamed a few choice insults at the driver, stuff that would have gotten me a life sentence, and stopped at a greasy, halal, cart at the corner. I ordered 2 lamb gyros that tasted like seasoned cardboard, but it was fuel, boss. I wolfed them down while walking toward the bus stop, my mind racing through every possibility of what I was walking into. I caught a beat-up bus that smelled like wet dogs and copper pennies. There were 2 junkies in the back whispering about the green lights, and honestly, boss, I thought they were just tripping balls at first. But then I felt it, this weird, metallic vibration in my teeth, like a low-frequency hum that didn't come from the bus engine. The sarcasm in my head started to fade, replaced by a cold realization. This wasn't just a job, boss. Something was off. I finally reached the spot. The building was a massive, windowless concrete slab covered in a thick, crusty layer of green copper oxidation. It stood there like a tomb in the middle of the fog, ancient and heavy. The smell hit me like a physical punch. It was a thick, cloying scent, like a morgue trying to hide the decay with cheap, dollar store lavender perfume, boss. I stood in front of the heavy iron doors, lit one last cigarette to steady my hands, and exhaled into the thick mist. "All right," I whispered, my voice sounding hollow. "Which one of you pricks is gonna hire me?" Suddenly, the door let out a heavy, metallic click, a sound so deep it felt like it hit me right in the chest, and swung open just a crack. It wasn't a mechanical sound, boss. It was like the building was taking a deep, hungry breath, finally letting me in. I stepped inside, boss. And that's when the real nightmare started. I stepped through that crack in the door, and the first thing that hit me wasn't the darkness, it was the cold. Not just Seattle winter cold, but a bone-chilling freeze that felt like it was trying to preserve something that should have stayed dead. The heavy iron door slammed shut behind me with a sound that echoed through my soul, a final, metallic thud that told me my old life was officially on the other side. I was standing in a lobby that looked like it was designed by a psychopath in the 70s. Everything was covered in that sick, neon green light, pulsing slowly like a dying heartbeat, boss. The air was thick, tasting like ozone and copper. I took a drag of my cigarette, but the smoke didn't rise, it just hung there, stagnant. "Hello?" I shouted, trying to keep my voice from cracking. "I'm here for the gig. Anyone alive in this dump, or do I just start stealing the fucking furniture?" I was trying to sound like the same cocky disaster stone, boss, but my skin was crawling. I started walking down a long corridor where the floor was made of dark stone that didn't reflect any light at all. At the end of the hall was a single office door made of frosted glass. A dim light was glowing from behind it, flickering like a dying candle. I didn't knock, I'm not the type to wait for an invitation, boss. I pushed it open and stepped into a room smaller than my apartment. Sitting behind a massive mahogany desk was a guy in a sharp, gray suit. But I couldn't look at his face. It wasn't that he was wearing a mask, it was like my eyes kept sliding off his features. Every time I tried to focus on his nose or his eyes, it felt like looking at a corrupted video file, just a blur of static and shadows. "Sit down, Mr. Stone," the man said. His voice didn't come from his throat, it sounded like it was being broadcasted from a speaker inside my own skull. It was smooth, devoid of any emotion, like a GPS voice with a goddamn attitude. I sat down, trying to look unimpressed, leaning back and crossing my legs. "Nice place," I said, flicking my ash onto his rug. "A bit heavy on the green, though. Makes you look like a fucking alien, boss." The man didn't flinch. He pushed a sheet of paper toward me. It felt like cold, dried skin, heavy and yellowed with age. "The contract," he said. I looked down, and the letters started moving. They were twitching like little black insects, rearranging themselves as I tried to read them. I caught glimpses of words that made my blood run cold: eternal, access, vessel, chain. None of it made sense, but then I saw the number at the bottom. $10,000. For 1 week of work. My ego won the fight against my common sense right then and there, boss. "Where's the pen?" I asked, reaching into my hoodie. The man didn't move, but a quill appeared on the desk. It looked like a feather from some bird that shouldn't exist, black, oily, and sharp enough to draw blood. "Sign in the space provided," the man whispered. I grabbed the quill, and the second the tip touched my skin, it bit me. Hard. A sharp, stinging pain shot up my arm, and a single drop of my blood hit the page. The blood was absorbed instantly, turning the insect-like letters into a deep, vibrating red, boss. "Contracted," the man said, and for a split second, I saw a flash of a grin in that static blur of a face. Suddenly, I felt a massive weight drop onto my shoulders. My neck snapped back as a cold, heavy chain manifested out of thin air, wrapping itself twice around my throat with a metallic click. I clawed at my neck, but I couldn't feel anything there with my hands, even though I could feel the suffocating, freezing weight of the metal digging into my skin. "What the fuck did you just do to me?" I hissed, standing up fast. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The man just stood up, his face still a distorted mess of shadows. "You are now the warden of the forgotten," he said, and the room began to dissolve around us. The walls started melting into that thick, green liquid, and the floor felt like it was falling away into an abyss. I wasn't in an office anymore, boss. I was standing in a vast, dark archive that stretched out for miles in every direction, filled with rows of metal filing cabinets that went up so high I couldn't see the ceiling. The only light came from the neon green glow of the chain around my neck, reflecting off the cold steel. I was alone, trapped, and I had a feeling that $10,000 was the biggest fucking lie I'd ever been told. I looked down at my hands, and they were shaking, boss. I reached for my cigarettes, but the pack was gone. In its place was a heavy, brass key that felt like it was freezing my palm. I was officially on the clock, and the first thing I heard in that endless silence was the sound of a heavy elevator cable snapping somewhere in the distance. Well, I whispered to the darkness. Disaster Stone, you wanted a hustle. Now you've got a nightmare. Standing in that endless darkness, the only thing keeping me from losing my mind was the neon green glow from the chain around my neck. It reflected off the cold, brushed steel of the filing cabinets like a radioactive warning sign. The silence was heavy, the kind of silence that feels like it's pushing against your eardrums, boss. But then, that sound came back, the screech of metal grinding against metal, echoing from somewhere deep in the gut of this place. I followed the sound, my boots clicking against the stone floor like a countdown clock. I turned a corner and there it was, elevator number 4. It wasn't like any elevator I'd seen in Seattle, boss. This thing was a cage of rusted iron, wrapped in heavy chains that looked like they were pulsing. The doors weren't just closed, they were welded shut with thick, jagged seams of brass. And the screaming? It wasn't coming from a person. It was coming from the cables. They were vibrating so hard they were singing a high-pitched, agonizing note that made my teeth ache. "All right, boss, let's see what's behind door number 1, I muttered, trying to sound braver than I felt. I reached out with the brass key that terror-faced manager gave me. The moment the key got close to the lock, the chains on the elevator started to slither like snakes, making room for me. I jammed the key in, turned it, and the weld seams literally cracked open, spraying sparks of that same green light everywhere. The doors groaned open, and a cloud of freezing vapor rolled out, smelling like wet earth and old, forgotten bank vaults. I stepped inside, and the floor tilted instantly. There were no buttons, boss. No lobby or penthouse. Just a single, glowing lever made of what looked like human bone. I grabbed it, shoved it down, and the elevator didn't just move, it dropped. My stomach did a backflip as we plummeted into the dark. I was thrown against the back wall, the chain around my neck tightening as if it was tethering me to the car. Through the gaps in the iron cage, I saw levels flying by, but they weren't floors, boss. They were snapshots of moments. I saw a crowded street in Cairo from my childhood, then a rainy night in Seattle, then a face I didn't recognize crying in a dark room. Each one flickered by in a strobe light blur of green and black. Then, the elevator slammed to a halt so hard I hit the floor, boss. My head was spinning, and for a second, I thought I was gonna puke up those gyros from earlier. The doors shrieked open, revealing a hallway that looked like it was breathing. The walls were lined with thousands of small, glass jars, each one containing a flickering, gray flame. "Welcome to level 9, a voice whispered. It wasn't the manager this time. It was coming from a small, hunched figure sitting on a pile of discarded ledgers. The guy had a face like a crumpled paper bag and eyes that were nothing but empty sockets glowing with a dim, white light. "You're late, Disaster Stone. The files in Section B are starting to leak." I stood up, dusting off my hoodie, trying to regain my edge. "Listen here, Grandpa," I snapped, "I don't care about leaks unless it's a leak in my bank account. Just tell me what I'm supposed to guard so I can get my 10 grand and get the fuck out of here, boss." The old man cackled, a dry, papery sound that sent shivers down my spine. He pointed a bony finger toward the end of the hall, where a single, massive filing cabinet stood open, spilling out shadows that looked a lot like reaching hands. "Guard the secrets," he whispered. "Because if they get out, Disaster, there won't be a world left to spend your money in." I looked at the shadows, then at the heavy chain around my neck that was now glowing brighter than ever. I realized then that I wasn't the guard, boss. I was the bait. Fucking great, I whispered, reaching for a cigarette that wasn't there. Just another Tuesday night. I stood there watching that creepy old man dissolve into the shadows of level 9. The air down here was different. It felt heavy, like I was walking through invisible syrup, and every breath tasted like I was inhaling the fucking dust of 1,000 dead libraries. I looked down at my hands, and the neon green glow from my neck chain was reflecting off my skin, making me look like some kind of radioactive freak. Section B, I muttered to myself. Let's go see what's leaking, disaster stone. I started walking toward the end of the hall where that massive cabinet stood. As I got closer, the whispering started. It wasn't just one voice, it was a goddamn stadium full of people all muttering their deepest, darkest shit at once. I reached the cabinet, and it was a total mess, boss. The drawers were hanging open like broken ribs, and this thick, black smoke was oozing out, crawling along the floor like it had a mind of its own. I reached out to shove the top drawer shut, but my hand stopped an inch away. A file was stuck in the crack. It was a simple manila folder, but it was vibrating. I grabbed it, and the moment my fingers touched the tab, the whispering stopped dead. Everything went silent. I flipped it open, expecting to see some boring government secrets or maybe some juicy scandal. Instead, I saw a photo of myself. It was me, boss. But not me now. It was me at 5 years old, sitting on a dusty curb in Cairo, eating a piece of flatbread. The detail was insane. I could see the smudge of dirt on my cheek in the exact way the sunlight hit the old brick wall behind me. But then the photo started to change. The kid in the picture looked up, his eyes turning that same toxic neon green, and he started screaming. Not a sound I could hear with my ears, but a sound that ripped through my brain like a serrated blade. What the fuck is this? I hissed, slamming the folder shut. But the archive wasn't done with me. The other drawers started sliding open, one by one, with a rhythmic metallic clack that sounded like a giant heart beating. Files started flying out, hovering in the air around me like a cyclone of paper. Each one was a life, boss. Each one was a secret that some poor bastard had tried to bury, and now they were all looking for a way out. That's when I saw it. At the center of the cyclone, a single drawer at the very bottom slid out with a heavy groan. Inside wasn't a file. It was an eye. A massive, golden eye, at least the size of a basketball, sitting in a velvet-lined tray. It was wet, blinking, and the pupil was a vertical slit that looked like a tear in reality. The open eye, just like the old man said. The eye turned, focusing its gaze directly on the chain around my neck. The chain reacted instantly, tightening until I could barely breathe, the links glowing so bright they were blinding. I felt a surge of energy rush through me, a flood of memories that weren't mine. I saw the fall of empires, the birth of stars, and a guy in Seattle getting his morning coffee, all at the fucking same time. It was too much, boss. My brain felt like it was being microwaved. Is this what I'm guarding? I choked out, clawing at the chain. A goddamn eyeball? Are you fucking kidding me? The eye blinked, and a wave of pure, unadulterated cold washed over me. I realized then that the eye wasn't a secret, it was a witness. It was the thing that recorded everything the world wanted to forget. And as the warden, I wasn't just there to keep people out. I was there to keep the eye in. Because if that thing ever looked at the sun, the truth would burn the world to a crisp, boss. I grabbed a heavy brass paperweight from a nearby desk and shoved it into the drawer, forcing the eye back into the dark. The cyclone of papers collapsed, falling to the floor like dead birds. The whispering started up again, but this time it sounded like a warning. I leaned against the cabinet, my heart thumping against my ribs. I was a bad boy from the streets, used to dealing with thugs and shitty landlords, but this was some cosmic level bullshit. I looked at the brass key in my hand, then back at the dark hallway. 10 grand a week, I whispered, wiping the sweat from my forehead. I should have asked for a fucking million, boss. I needed to get the fuck out of that basement. My head was spinning from that giant eyeball, and the neon chain was humming a tune that made my skin feel like it was vibrating off my bones. I found a side exit, a heavy copper door that looked like it hadn't been greased since the Great Depression. I kicked it open, expecting a breath of fresh Seattle air. Instead, I stepped into the most fucked up garden you've ever seen, boss. We were still on the property, but the fog was so thick I could barely see my own boots. The ground wasn't dirt, it was this gray, powdery ash that crunched like dried insects under my feet. And the plants? They weren't green, boss. They were made of bone. White, bleached ribs sticking out of the ground like ferns, and skulls blooming with teeth instead of petals. It was a goddamn graveyard masquerading as a backyard. Who the hell grows a garden out of skeletons? I muttered, lighting a cigarette that tasted like sulfur. I started walking through the rows of bone hedges, the chain around my neck clinking against my chest. Every time the metal hit my skin, I heard a faint whisper, like the bones were trying to tell me their names. Then I saw him. The gardener. He was a tall, lanky bastard standing near a tree made of intertwined spinal columns. He was wearing a tattered burlap apron, and he was holding a pair of rusty shears. But here's the kicker, boss, his mouth was sewn shut. Not with thread, but with thick, tarnished copper wire. Every time he moved his jaw, the wire strained against his skin, turning it a bruised purple. "Yo, Smiley!" I shouted, trying to keep my bad boy mask on even though my heart was doing 120 beats per minute. "You the one in charge of the landscaping? Because your taste sucks ass, boss." The gardener stopped. He turned around slowly, his head tilting at an angle that would have snapped a normal man's neck. He didn't have eyes, just two dark pits filled with that same glowing green liquid I'd seen in the lobby. He pointed the shears at me, and then he pointed at the ground. I looked down. At my feet, a small skeleton hand was reaching out of the ash, clawing at my shoelaces. I jumped back, shouting every curse word I'd learned in the back alleys of Cairo. "Get your fucking hands off me!" I hissed, kicking the hand back into the dust. The gardener started to vibrate. A sound started coming out of him, not from his mouth, but from his chest. It was a low, guttural growl that sounded like stones being ground together. He walked toward me, each step heavy and deliberate. He held up a small, wooden sign and shoved it in my face. It said, "The truth grows here. Feed the roots." "Feed them what, boss?" "My hopes and dreams." "Because I'm fresh out of both," I snapped. The gardener pointed the shears at the chain around my neck. He made a cutting motion in the air. Suddenly, the chain tightened so hard I fell to my knees, gasping for air. The bone plants around me started to glow, feeding off the energy coming from my throat. I realized then that I wasn't just the warden, I was the goddamn fertilizer. This whole place was a cycle of misery, and I was the new battery. I grabbed a loose rib from a nearby bush and swung it at him. "Stay the fuck back!" I roared. The gardener stopped, his wire-sewn mouth twitching as if he was trying to laugh. He backed away into the fog, disappearing before I could blink. I stood up, shaking the ash off my hoodie, my neck still burning from the chain. I looked back at the copper door. I wanted to run, boss. I wanted to find a bus, find a plane, find anything to get away from this freak show. But the chain pulled me back toward the building. I was tethered. 10 grand, I whispered, spitting on the bone ground. "If I survive this, I'm burning this fucking place to the ground, boss." I slammed that copper door shut and leaned my back against it, my lungs burning like I just ran a marathon through a burning tire fire. That bone garden was some next-level sh*T, and the gardener's wired-shut face was burned into my retinas. I needed a second to breathe, but this building doesn't do breaks, boss. I turned around and realized I wasn't in the lobby anymore. The hallway ahead of me had changed. It didn't make any goddamn sense. The walls were tilting at angles that should have been physically impossible, like a funhouse mirror but without the fun part. The ceiling was sloping down until it was inches from my head, and the floor felt like it was made of rubberized meat. "Okay, disaster," I whispered, reaching for a smoke. "Focus. It's just geometry. Shitty, demonic geometry." I started walking, but every step I took forward felt like I was being pulled sideways. I looked at the wallpaper. It was a pattern of repeating eyes, and as I walked, they all tracked me. Every single one of them. I felt like a bug pinned to a board. The neon green chain around my neck started to hum again, but this time it wasn't a vibration, it was a warning. It was getting hot, boss, searing the skin on my throat until I smelled burning hair and cheap hoodie fabric. "Fuck!" I yelled, clawing at the links. "Take it easy. I'm moving as fast as I can." The hallway started to stretch. I looked behind me, and the door I just come through was a mile away. I looked ahead, and the end of the hall was disappearing into a tiny pinprick of light. It was like I was stuck in a glitch, a corrupted save file in a world that hated my guts. Then the walls started to bleed. Not blood, boss. That thick, black oil I'd seen in the archive started oozing from the seams of the wallpaper, smelling like ancient rot and burnt electronics. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the distorted air. It wasn't the manager, and it wasn't the old man. It was a woman's voice, soft, cold, and sounding like it was coming from underwater. "Disaster Stone," she whispered. "Why do you carry the weight of a world that doesn't know your name?" I stopped. I pulled out my pocket knife, the blade flicking out with a satisfying snick. "Who's there?" I barked. "Show yourself, you coward. I've dealt with worse than you in the slums of Cairo, boss." A door appeared on my left, a door that hadn't been there a second ago. It was painted a vibrant, blood red, a sharp contrast to the sickly green glow of the hallway. It opened slowly, and a hand reached out. It was a normal hand, delicate and pale, but as it moved into the green light, the skin peeled back like wet paper, revealing the muscle and bone underneath. "The geometry is broken because you are still trying to fit," the voice said. "Let go of the chain, disaster. Let go of the contract." "Oh, sure." I laughed, though my voice sounded hollow in the shifting hall. "Just let go of the magical, invisible chain that's currently welding itself to my spine." "Why didn't I think of that, boss? You're a fucking genius." The hallway suddenly buckled. The floor rose up like a wave, throwing me toward the red door. I hit the frame hard, my shoulder screaming in pain. The black oil was rising now, covering my boots, climbing up my jeans like hungry leeches. The chain on my neck let out a high-pitched scream, a sound that made my nose start to bleed. I had to make a choice. Stay in the hall and get swallowed by the oil, or go through the red door into whatever hell was waiting on the other side. I looked at the oil, then at the skeletal hand reaching for me. "Well," I muttered, wiping the blood from my lip. "Red's always been my favorite color, boss." I dove through the door just as the hallway collapsed into a single, crushing point of darkness. I tumbled through that red door and hit a floor that didn't feel like wood. It was soft, warm, and had a pulse that made me want to jump back into the black oil. I scrambled to my feet, my heart thumping like a prisoner, and looked around. This wasn't just a room, boss. This was a library made of living tissue. The walls were lined with shelves carved out of oversized femurs and ribcages. The books weren't leather, they were bound in human skin, pores still visible under the red light. I saw tattoos on some spines, names of lovers long dead. The smell was a mix of a butcher shop and a hospital wing that's given up on hygiene. "What in the fuck is this?" I whispered. I wiped blood from my nose, but the neon chain didn't care. It was glowing crimson now, reacting to the room. It felt like it was digging into my collarbone, pulling me toward the center of the hall. At the desk made of a massive skull sat the woman. She wore a dress of surgical gauze, her hair a mess of silver wires. She was calmly stitching pages into a fresh skin-bound book. "You're late for your reading, Disaster Stone," she said. Her voice was like ice cubes in a glass of hemlock. "I don't read books that have a pulse, boss," I snapped, hand on my knife. "I'm just here to survive and collect my check. Tell me how to get back to the archive before I start using your furniture for target practice." She looked up. She had mirrors where her eyes should be. I saw myself reflected, but the me in the mirrors was rotting, skin sloughing off to reveal that green glow. "The contract wasn't for security, you fucking idiot," she whispered. "You didn't agree to guard the archive. You agreed to become it. Every secret needs a shelf. Why do you think your name is Disaster? Because you are the end of the story." She stood up, gauze unraveling. She pointed at a shelf. A book flew off and landed at my feet. The title was my own name, Disaster Stone, Volume 1, The Cairo Years. "Pick it up," she commanded. "Not a chance in hell, boss," I growled. But the chain surged with electricity, sending me to my knees. My hand gripped the book. A scream ripped out of my throat. It wasn't just a book, it was a sensory overload. I felt every punch from the slums, every cold night in Seattle. It was being sucked out of my head and printed onto the pages. "Your bleeding memories, Disaster," she laughed. "By the end of the week, there won't be a you left. Just a set of volumes for the manager to browse." I felt my identity slipping. I roared with rage and shoved my lit cigarette into the center of the book. The skin hissed, the book shrieked in a voice like mine, and the connection snapped. I threw the charred volume at her mirrored face and bolted for a spiral staircase made of vertebrae. "You can't burn what's already written, boss," she screamed, but I didn't look back. I climbed those bone stairs 3 at a time. I burst through a hatch, gasping. I was back in the main archive, but the lights were out. The only thing I could see was the faint green glow of the cabinets, and the sound of something very big, and very hungry, breathing in the dark right behind me. 10 grand, I wheezed. "If I find that manager, I'm gonna shove that money so far up his static face he'll be shitting hundreds for a month, boss." The darkness in the main archive wasn't just an absence of light, it was a physical weight, pressing against my chest like a cold slab of lead. I stayed frozen on the floor, the vertebrae staircase hatch still vibrating behind me. My lungs were burning, but I forced my breath to go shallow. I didn't need to see to know I wasn't alone. The sound was unmistakable, a wet, raspy wheeze coming from the shadows between the rows of filing cabinets. It sounded like someone was dragging a bag of raw meat across a gravel floor. "Okay, Disaster," I whispered to myself, the neon green chain on my neck pulsing a faint, rhythmic warning. "Don't be a fucking pussy. You've outrun cops in Seattle and thugs in Cairo. This is just another predatory prick in a suit." I reached into my pocket and realized my lighter was gone. Great. Just fucking great. I was blind, trapped in a haunted filing room, being hunted by something that sounded like it had too many legs. I started to crawl, keeping my back against the cold steel of the cabinets. Every time the metal clinked against my chain, the breathing in the dark stopped. It was listening. It was learning my rhythm. Suddenly, a row of cabinets to my left flew open with a deafening metallic crash. I scrambled back, my boots slipping on the polished floor. A pale, elongated limb, too long to be human, snaked out of the darkness, its fingers ending in jagged shards of obsidian. It swiped the air exactly where my head had been a second ago, sparks flying as its claws scraped the steel. "Missed me, you fucking piece of shit!" I roared, my survival instinct finally kicking the door down. I didn't wait for a second swing. I bolted. I ran blindly through the aisles, the neon green glow of the chain acting like a flickering strobe light. I could see flashes of the thing in the gaps between the cabinets, a distorted, hairless torso, ribs protruding like the bone garden hedges, and a head that was nothing but a massive, vertical mouth filled with needle teeth. It didn't have eyes, boss. It was tracking the vibration of my heartbeat through the floor. I ducked into an alcove and held my breath, my hand trembling as I gripped my pocket knife. The creature slowed down, its heavy, wet footsteps echoing through the silence. Thump. Drag. Thump. Drag. It was right outside my row. I could smell it now, that same cloying scent of a morgue sprayed with lavender, but stronger, more rotten. "I know you're in there, Disaster Stone," a voice hissed. It wasn't the manager or the librarian. It was a distorted version of my own voice, like a recording played back through a broken radio. "Why keep fighting, boss? You're already part of the collection. Just let me file you away. The only thing you're filing is a report for your own funeral, you ugly bastard." I yelled, and I threw my heavy brass key as hard as I could down the opposite hallway. The key hit the floor with a loud clank, and the creature shrieked, a sound like metal tearing, and charged toward the noise. I didn't waste a heartbeat. I ran the other way, toward the faint, flickering light of the elevator. I hit the call button like it was a detonator, my eyes fixed on the darkness behind me. The doors groaned open just as the creature realized it had been played. It turned, its massive mouth unhinging as it lunged toward me. I dove into the elevator, slamming my fist against the bone lever. The doors hissed shut, and I heard the screech of obsidian claws against the iron just as the car began to rise. I could feel the elevator shake from the impact of that thing hitting the doors, hungry for my goddamn skin. I sank to the floor, my hoodie soaked in sweat and blood. The chain on my neck was cooling down, turning back to its usual toxic green glow. My knuckles were white from gripping the railing, and my teeth were grinding so hard I thought they'd snap. 10 grand, I wheezed, looking at my reflection in the polished elevator door. My eyes looked older, darker, like the archive was already starting to rewrite who I was. "When I get out of here, I'm buying a fucking tank, and I'm coming back to level this whole *TTY building, boss." The elevator climbed slowly, the bone lever vibrating under my hand like it was part of a living creature. Every time the car passed a floor, I heard a sound like a deck of cards being shuffled, thousands of files sliding in and out of their metal homes. My head was pounding, and the blood from my nose had dried into a crusty mess on my lip. I didn't even know what day it was anymore. Time in this fucked up place didn't move in a straight line, it looped and coiled like the snakes in the bone garden. The elevator chimed, a hollow, metallic ring that sounded like a funeral bell. The doors slid open, and I stepped out into a room that looked like the inside of a giant chrome sphere. There were no cabinets here, no skin-bound books, and no static-faced managers. Just a vast, empty space where every sound I made echoed back at me 100 times. "Hello?" I whispered. "Hello, hello, hello." The room threw back at me, the voices overlapping until it sounded like a choir of ghosts. I started walking, my boots squeaking on the reflective floor. As I moved, the echoes started to change. They weren't just repeating what I said, they were saying things I hadn't even thought yet. I heard my mother's voice from Cairo, laughing. I heard the sound of my first car crash in Seattle. I heard the clinking of a chain, my chain, but it sounded like it was being dragged over 1,000,000 miles of broken glass. "This is the echo chamber, Disaster Stone," a voice said, but it came from everywhere at once. In the center of the sphere, a figure began to materialize. It wasn't a monster or a ghost. It was me. Another Disaster Stone, wearing the same salt-stained hoodie and the same dirt-smudged jeans. But this version of me didn't have a chain around his neck. Instead, his skin was translucent, and I could see the files floating inside his chest like organs. "Who the fuck are you?" I growled, reaching for my pocket knife. "I'm the version of you that stayed for the second week," the other me said, a sad grin touching his lips. "I'm the one who took the money and thought he could outrun the contract. But look at me, boss. I'm just a walking index now. A table of contents for a story that never ends. He walked toward me, and as he did, the echoes in the room reached a deafening roar. I felt my own memories being pulled toward him, like he was a human vacuum for everything that made me me. My name, my face, my favorite brand of cigarettes, it was all leaking out of my ears and into the chrome air. The manager doesn't want your soul, disaster, the echo me whispered, leaning in close. He wants your disaster. He needs someone who knows how to survive the darkness so he can use that survival to keep the archive alive. You're not the guard. You're the heart-lung machine for this whole *T show. The chain around my neck flared a blinding, toxic green. It wasn't just tightening now, it was growing roots, digging deep into my spine and my brain. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated agony that made my knees buckle. The echo me reached out a hand, his fingers turning into white paper. Give in, boss, he said. The 10 grand is already in your account. Just stop fighting and let the files take their place. I looked up at him, my vision blurring, my teeth grinding so hard I could taste the enamel. You think a bit of paper and some fancy echoes can break me? I hissed, my voice sounding like it was being dragged through gravel. I'm Disaster Stone. I don't give in. I just find a bigger fucking hammer. I didn't use the knife. I used my head. I lunged forward and slammed my forehead into his translucent face. The echo me shattered like a glass bottle, his body exploding into a cloud of white confetti and bitter, gray smoke. The room shrieked, the chrome walls cracking as the echoes turned into a single, high-pitched scream of pain. The floor beneath me gave way, and I felt myself falling again. But this time, I wasn't falling into darkness. I was falling toward a light that looked like a computer screen, flickering in the distance. I'm coming for you, static face, I roared into the abyss. And I'm bringing the whole fucking building down with me, boss. I hit the floor of that new level like a sack of wet cement. My head was ringing from the impact with my own echo, and the taste of copper in my mouth told me I'd probably cracked a tooth. I opened my eyes, expecting more bone gardens or meat libraries, but what I saw was even weirder. I was standing in a room filled with thousands of old-school CRT monitors, stacked from the floor to a ceiling I couldn't even see. Every screen was flickering with static, but it wasn't that no signal kind, it was that same distorted blur that made up the manager's fucking face. System error, 1,000 screens whispered at once. Unrecognized file, Disaster Stone. Corruption detected. The neon chain on my neck was sparking, sending little jolts of green electricity into my collarbone. It wasn't just tethering me anymore, it was trying to update me. I felt my thoughts being sorted into folders. Fear moved to drive C, rage moved to a temporary file. I was being defragmented like a shitty old hard drive, boss. Get the fuck out of my head. I roared, swinging my fist at the nearest monitor. The screen shattered, spraying glass and a thick, black fluid across my hoodie. But the static didn't stop. It just moved to the next screen. I looked around and saw a central console, a massive keyboard made of human teeth and a joystick carved from a femur. This was the nerve center, the place where the static-faced bastard controlled the flow of the archive. If I was going to break the contract, I had to crash the system. I walked up to the console, my boots crunching on broken glass. The monitors around me started playing clips of my own life, fast, flickering images of the streets of Cairo and the rain in Seattle. But they were changing. In the videos, I was slowly losing my face, becoming another blur in a suit. You are a beautiful disaster, the screens whispered. Why fight the upgrade? You will be eternal. You will be the perfect record. I don't want to be a record, boss. I want to be a problem, I hissed. I grabbed the femur joystick and shoved it forward. The monitors shrieked, the static turning a violent, bloody red. I started slamming my hands onto the teeth keys, typing every curse word I knew in Arabic and English, creating a massive logic loop in their demonic code. The archive wanted order, so I gave it pure, unadulterated chaos. The room began to shake. The green glow of the chain started to flicker, losing its hold on my spine. I could feel the files in my brain retreating, the folders of my identity slamming shut. The black fluid started leaking from every monitor now, flooding the floor, but I didn't stop. I kept typing, kept smashing, kept being the disaster they'd paid for. Suddenly, the monitors all went black. A single screen in the center flickered on. It showed the manager. He wasn't sitting in his office, he was standing right behind me. I could feel the cold radiating from his charcoal suit, smelling like a fresh grave. "You are breaking the equipment, Mr. Stone," the manager said. The voice didn't come from his face, it came from the speakers in the walls, distorted and heavy. "This behavior is not covered in your contract. There will be deductions." I turned around, my pocket knife open in my hand, my eyes wild. "Deduct this, you fucking glitch." I lunged at him, but my blade passed right through him like he was made of smoke and bad intentions. The manager didn't move. He just raised a hand, and the chain around my neck turned white hot. "You think you can crash a system that has been running since the first secret was whispered in the dark? You are just a single bit of bad data. We don't delete bad data, disaster, we isolate it." The floor beneath the console opened up, and a swarm of those obsidian claws from the silent hunter reached out, grabbing my ankles. They started dragging me down into the static-filled abyss of the server room. "Enjoy the isolation, boss," the manager whispered. "We'll see if you're still a disaster after a century in the void." I clawed at the floor, my fingers breaking as I tried to hold on. But the black oil was too slick. I was falling again, but this time, the light of the screens was fading, and all I could hear was the sound of a hard drive spinning down to zero. "I'm still, on the clock," I wheezed as the darkness swallowed me whole. The void wasn't empty. That was the first lie the static-faced bastard told me. It was crowded, packed with the trash of the universe. I was floating in a soup of half-deleted memories and corrupted code that looked like jagged glass. Every time a shard touched my skin, I felt a flash of someone else's life, a wedding in 1920, a murder in a back alley, a dog dying in the rain. It was like being trapped in a blender full of broken mirrors. "System isolated," a voice boomed, but it sounded like it was coming from inside my own teeth. "Data aging in progress." The neon chain around my neck had turned a dull, sickly gray. Without the archive to power it, the metal was cold, dead cold. I tried to move, but there was no up or down here, just an endless fall through a digital dumpster. "Fuck this," I hissed, my breath coming out as a puff of green static. "I'm not dying in a recycling bin, boss." I reached out and grabbed a passing shard of data. It was sharp, sliced right through my palm, but I didn't let go. It was a memory of a guy who'd been cheated out of his life savings. The rage in that memory was pure, raw energy. I didn't just hold it, I inhaled it. I felt the guy's anger fuse with my own disaster-level spite. If the manager wanted to isolate bad data, then I was going to become the biggest fucking virus this system had ever seen. I started swimming through the void, grabbing every shard of pain, anger, and betrayal I could find. I wasn't just Disaster Stone anymore. I was becoming a magnet for every error the archive had ever tried to delete. My skin started to glow with a jagged, flickering light, not the neat green of the chain, but a chaotic, flickering white that looked like a lightning storm trapped in a hoodie. "Warning," the void whispered, the voice sounding panicked now. "Integrity breach. Virus detected." "You're goddamn right, it's a virus." I roared. My voice was no longer human, it sounded like 1,000 speakers blowing out at once. I saw it then, a tiny pinprick of static in the distance. The exit. It was the hole they used to dump the trash. It was closing, shrinking like a dying eye. I didn't have time to walk. I focused all the stolen rage into the chain around my neck. I grabbed the links with both hands and pulled. The chain didn't break, it erupted. A blast of pure, corrupted energy shot out of my chest, propelling me through the void like a human missile. I crashed through shards of history and piles of deleted souls, screaming a war cry that shook the very foundations of the archive. I hit the exit just as it was about to vanish. There was a sound like a hard drive shattering, and suddenly, the cold of the void was gone. I landed hard on a floor made of cold, white marble. I wasn't in the basement or the library. I was in the penthouse. The lights were bright, the air was clean, and there, sitting at a desk made of pure light, was the manager. But this time, his face wasn't static. He looked exactly like me. "Welcome back, Mr. Stone," the other me said, adjusting his sharp, gray tie. "You're just in time for your performance review, boss." I stood there in that pristine white penthouse, staring at the man behind the desk. He was a mirror image of me, right down to the scar on my eyebrow, but his eyes, they weren't human, boss. They were glowing with that same toxic, neon green light I saw in the Bone Garden. He looked like the version of me that actually made it, the one who didn't live in a shitty apartment in Seattle, but the cost was written all over his aura. He looked cold. Dead. "Sit down, disaster," the mirror manager said, his voice perfectly mimicking my own, but without the soul. "We need to discuss your metrics. You've been a very disruptive asset." Asset? I spat, the chain around my neck vibrating so hard it was blurring my vision. "I'm the guy who's gonna burn this glass cage to the fucking ground, boss. You think you can just replace me with a version of myself that wears a tie?" The mirror manager sighed, a sound like wind blowing through a graveyard. He tapped the desk, and a holographic projection of that terrifying mask from the image, the one with the horns and the glowing runes, appeared between us. "This is the end state, disaster," he whispered. "The devil's chain isn't just a leash. It's a conduit. Every time you scream, every time you fight, you feed the archive. The destruction of humanity isn't a goal, it's a side effect of the data we process. By the end of the 14th chapter of your contract, you won't need that hoodie. You'll be wearing the horns. You'll be the one screaming the runes into the dark." I looked at the hologram. The mouth was open in a silent, eternal roar, the green symbols pulsing like radioactive teeth. I felt a phantom pain in my own jaw, like my teeth were trying to rearrange themselves into those same fucking shapes. "I don't sign for that sh*T, I growled, lunging across the desk. But the mirror manager didn't flinch. As my hand got close to his throat, the chain around my neck suddenly surged. It didn't just tighten, it started to grow. Heavy, rusted links erupted from my skin, wrapping around my arms and chest, pulling me down toward the marble floor. I let out a roar, and for a split second, I saw my reflection in the window. My eyes were turning emerald, and my forehead was splitting open, two dark, jagged points of bone starting to push through. "The process has already reached 85%, the mirror manager said, standing up. He walked around the desk, his shoes clicking with a sound that echoed like a hammer on a coffin. "The more you resist, the more disaster you become. And the archive loves a disaster." He leaned down, his face inches from mine. I could see the runes glowing behind his teeth. "You want to save your humanity, boss? It's already been filed under obsolete. You're part of the collection now." I bit my tongue until I tasted blood, real, warm, human blood. That taste was the only thing keeping me from slipping into the green fog. "I'm not a file," I wheezed, my voice cracking into a guttural, demonic rasp. "We'll see about that," he said, turning back to the window. "Welcome to the final phase. Tomorrow, you stop being the warden. Tomorrow, you become the god of the trash." The floor suddenly dissolved into a whirlpool of green static, and I felt myself falling one last time, toward a place where the air was made of screams and the light was made of teeth. I woke up face down in the ash of the archive, but something was wrong. My jaw felt like it had been unhinged and put back together by a drunk mechanic. I tried to curse, tried to spit out the taste of that green static, but the words didn't come out in Arabic or English. They came out in a series of sharp, metallic clicks and hums, the same fucking runes I saw in that mask's mouth. I crawled over to a puddle of that black oil and looked at my reflection. I didn't scream, boss. I couldn't. My mouth was glowing with a toxic green light, and the skin on my forehead had split to let those jagged, black horns through. I looked like a demon out of a nightmare, a god of the trash, just like that mirror bastard said. Is this the ending you wrote for me? I growled, and the air around me literally cracked. The runes coming out of my mouth weren't just sounds, they were commands. When I spoke, the filing cabinets nearby shivered and bowed. I stood up, the devil's chain now fused into my very collarbones, glowing with a power that felt like a sun trapped in a cage. I realized then that the archive had made a massive fucking mistake. They thought that by turning me into this thing, they'd finally have me under control. They thought I'd be just another volume on their shelf. But they forgot one thing, I'm the one telling this story, boss. I walked toward the center of the archive, my footsteps echoing like thunder. The silent hunter, that multi-legged freak, jumped out from behind a cabinet, ready to finish the job. I didn't even pull my knife. I just opened my mouth and spoke a single rune of deletion. The green light hit the creature, and it didn't just die, it was erased. It turned into a shower of white pixels and vanished into the ceiling. My turn now, I whispered, the runes vibrating in the air like angry hornets. I wasn't heading for the exit anymore. I was heading for the core. If I was the heart-lung machine for this place, then I was going to decide when the breathing stopped. I reached the central pillar of the archive, a massive column of light and data that held every secret ever told. The manager appeared again, his face flickering between my face and that static blur. You can't destroy this disaster. You are part of it. If the archive goes, you go with it. I laughed, and it sounded like a choir of falling buildings. That's where you're wrong, boss. I'm not just a character in your files. I'm the narrator. And the narrator doesn't die when the book ends, he just closes the cover. I grabbed the core with my clawed hands, the devil's chain turning white hot as I funneled all the rage, all the bad data, and every stolen memory I'd sucked out of the void directly into the system. I wasn't destroying it, I was rewriting it. The green light started to turn back to a warm, human gold. The bone garden began to bloom with actual flowers, and the skin book started to turn back into paper. I felt the horns on my head starting to recede, and the heavy weight of the chain began to lift. The contract is null and void, I roared, my voice finally sounding like Yusuf Walid again. Because I just edited the final fucking paragraph. The whole archive began to vibrate, the white marble of the penthouse cracking as the reality of the building started to fold in on itself. I wasn't going to perish, and I wasn't going to burn. I was just going home. The transition didn't happen with a bang. It felt like being dunked into a bucket of ice water after sitting in a sauna for a month. 1 second I was breathing fire and rewriting the laws of a demonic reality, and the next, thud. The air hit my lungs like a physical blow. It was thin, dusty, and tasted like the stale exhaust of a 2005 sedan. I was lying face down on the ground. The grit of the asphalt was digging into my cheek, and I could hear a distant siren somewhere over in the next block. It was the most beautiful *TTY sound I'd ever heard. I pushed myself up, my joints popping like bubble wrap. My head was spinning so fast I thought I'd puke. I looked down at my hands. The claws were gone. My skin was just skin. Pale, scarred, and shaking like a leaf. I scrambled to my feet and turned around. The door was there. That heavy, industrial iron door with the rusted handle. I grabbed it and yanked with everything I had. Clang. Nothing. It didn't even rattle. It felt like it was welded to the frame, or like there was nothing but solid brick behind it. I kicked it, screaming every curse word I knew, but the door just stood there, cold, dead, and mocking me. "Open the fucking door," I yelled. "Where's my money? Where's the manager?" Silence. Only the sound of a stray cat knocking over a trash can. I stood there for an hour, my chest heaving, waiting for a glitch or a spark. Nothing. The sun kept moving, and I just looked like a crazy guy in a dirty hoodie talking to a wall in a back alley. "God, you're pathetic, disaster," I muttered, sliding my back down the brick wall. "Look at you. A week-long psychotic break because you wanted 10 grand. You've been watching too many horror movies, you fucking idiot. There is no archive. There's just a guy with a headache and a missed week of life." I started the long walk back, feeling like the biggest loser on the planet. People pushed past me in the street, and I realized I probably smelled like a dumpster. I reached into my pocket for a smoke. I needed something to numb the fact that I just lost my mind for 7 days. My hand hit something cold. Something heavy. I pulled it out. My heart stopped. It wasn't my lighter. It was a single, heavy link of that neon green chain, a piece of obsidian-like metal with a tiny, screaming skull carved into the side. And in the shadows of the subway entrance, it gave off a faint, rhythmic pulse of green light. Thump pulse. Thump pulse. I looked at that link, then at my own reflection in the subway window. I burst out laughing, a dry, bitter sound that made people move away from me. "Nice one, boss," I whispered to my reflection. "You almost convinced yourself you were normal. Look at you. No money, no soul, and you're still carrying the sh*T that tried to kill you like it's a goddamn souvenir. You're not a hero, disaster. You're just a very well-documented accident." I pulled my hood up, the green glow reflecting in my eyes one last time. The contract wasn't over. It was just getting started. Make sure to like and subscribe, and good morning, evening, or night to you, boss.